Hi, I am Jenny Monarch McGuire. I am the Extension Educator with 4-H Youth Development in Du Bois County, and I am here to present to you. I signed up, now what, a volunteer orientation to help 4-H volunteers. So before we do anything, for all those who are new, it's very important that you fully know what our mission and our vision is. Now, the 4-H program, as you can see by our slides, is actually run by Purdue Extension. So it's going to be important to know both Purdue Extension's mission and vision as well as the 4-H program. So Purdue Extension, the mission is that we deliver practical research-based information that transforms lives and livelihoods. So that is our mission. And one of the ways that we do that is through the 4-H program. So the vision statement for this organization is that we will be a leader in providing relevant, high-impact educational programs that transform the lives and livelihoods of individuals and communities in Indiana and the world. Ultimately, this is our goal as Purdue Extension employees and to help run the 4-H program and to keep these things in mind. You can see below that a lot of people, they refer to the extension office as the 4-H office, but we do a lot more than that. So if anyone has any questions related to these other areas, like we do have a health and human sciences educator, an agri-natural resources educator, we do have people in charge of nutrition and wellness, and as of course I work with youth development in the 4-H program. Although my responsibilities don't necessarily have to tie just to 4-H, I do work with youth outside of that program. And then we're going to bring you to the Indiana 4-H mission and vision. And so this is again what 4-H lives by and what our ultimate goal is here. And it states that the Indiana 4-H Youth Development Mission is to provide real-life educational opportunities that develop young people who will have a positive impact on their communities and the world. Notice that it doesn't necessarily say there that kids have to bring projects to the fair. That is an important element of our program and how we showcase it to the community, but that is not necessarily essential for someone to participate in the 4-H program. That is an important thing to keep in mind because that is such a traditional aspect of our program. People think that that's the only way to be involved, but it is not. Youth in grades K through 12 can be involved in 4-H in many ways, and the fair is just one of them. And then our vision for our program is that we strive to be the premier community-based program empowering young people to reach their full potential. Again, we do that through lots of different ways, and we'll talk a little bit about that during this presentation. So some things that, might not be as commonly known. A lot of people know the 4-H's, head, heart, hands, and health, and about what those things mean. But not everyone realizes that 4-H is really guided in Indiana and divided up into 3 mission areas. So the 3 ways that we help youth develop into their full potential and all of that is through civic engagement, health and wellness, and science. And if you really think about all the projects that we offer in 4-H, you can really divide them all into these areas. Some you might not think that they could be divided. You're like, where does painting fit into that? Well, in the grand scheme of things, painting can actually be fit into health and wellness because painting is a way to de-stress and to, enjoy life and things like that. So in a way that's helping your mental health, and therefore that would fit into health and wellness. So really all the projects and all the activities that we do are really tied to one of these 3 areas. And as a volunteer, it's important to make sure that the work that you do with the club and the activities that you're doing with the youth all tied to these 3 areas in some way, shape, or form. And again, it's going to be important to let the kids know, hey, we're doing an activity based on science, or here's how this activity relates to health and wellness or civic engagement. That is going to be important to make sure the youth know why they're doing what they're doing. And then finally, this is another important guiding philosophy, if you will, of our work in 4-H and positive youth development. And those are the essential elements. And they really go down to 4 main areas, and that is belonging, independence, mastery, and generosity. And so we're going to break those down a little bit. They're belonging. So what is belonging? Well, as you can see from this slide, that youth need to know that they're cared for, feel like they are connected to the people in the group. As a club leader for the junior leaders, I do know there's several kids who don't tend to want to join junior leaders. And it's not because they don't want to do the work, it's because they don't feel like they have friends in the club. So that is something that if we can help at all, we want to make sure that kids feel connected to one another, that they feel connected to us, that they will feel a sense of belonging and want to keep coming back. Independence. That is really all about what 4-H is trying to teach kids. We're trying to teach kids how to learn different life skills that they can then move forward and do on their own. So it is going to be important that we do give kids an opportunity to problem solve on their own. It's really hard, and I've learned firsthand just how hard it can be when you're teaching kids an activity and they're doing it wrong, to want to fix it for them. And unless the kid comes to you asking specific questions, you should really let them try to problem solve on their own first, because that's how they're going to lead to be independent thinkers and know how to problem solve when a problem comes up. Mastery. Again, this ties a lot to independence, and building that self-confidence. When they start to struggle, that they learn how to problem solve and deal with those challenges. Again, it's going to be a fine balance between helping them enough that they feel like they can succeed and not get completely devastated by the fact that they aren't succeeding at that time, but also making sure that they feel accomplished and that they did it and that someone didn't do it for them. And then finally, generosity. This is a very important element to our 4-H program, especially in regards to service and community service and the things we do to help the community. So it's going to be very important that as a club leader or a volunteer that we are showcasing generosity and helping the community, and not always, doing everything just for our club, but kind of taking it out there and letting others know how we can help our community. And I put this slide on here just to show you a little bit. This is going to also be important as we go through, as your club leader and you're working with kids, is to think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And that I put this on here because sometimes maybe you're recruiting kids and you're wondering, well, why aren't they joining? I don't get it. Or why aren't they coming to club meetings? Well, sometimes there are other needs that have to be met first. As you can see here, at the bottom are the physiological needs, and these are needs that have to be met before any other needs can be met. So as if a family's struggling to buy food or things like that, they're not going to have any concerns about going to a club meeting. Same thing's true with safety. If they don't feel safe and secure, then they're not going to worry about that. Usually a lot of the 4-H members that are in our program don't have as many issues with that, but you never know. So it's always something that's important to consider, and taking the time to, maybe contact families to see if you can help or why they can't show up to a meeting. Another thing, again, that I mentioned before is that belonging piece. If they don't feel like they belong, they're not going to want to keep coming back, and they're not going to maybe be able to continue to do the work. They're not going to be able to feel that self-esteem, or want to feel pride in the work that they're doing if they don't feel like they belong there. And I really think belonging is a huge reason why some kids don't stay in our program. And that's what I feel like most of our efforts should be focused on, is making that kid feel like they belong there, that they would feel like they're losing something if they didn't come. Because at the end of the day, a lot of times we remember who we met, like all of the experiences that we had, more so than necessarily all the ribbons that we earned. So now that you've got a little bit of an idea of the overview, and what all goes into our 4-H program, I'm going to break up and discuss volunteer expectations. I'm not going to read all of these, but these are really important rules, and I'm just going to highlight some important pieces. So we do have policies and rules that are brought down by the Purdue Extension and Purdue University, especially rules related to child abuse and substance abuse. We do have a minor safety training that must be taken every 2 years in order to maintain your status as a volunteer. That is going to be important. It may seem silly, but it is a requirement of being a volunteer. Obviously, your conduct is going to be important. We do have volunteers sign adult behavioral expectations every year to make sure that you all understand the importances of being a volunteer. Being truthful and forthright is also important. Again, under no circumstances should volunteers be under influence of anything during their time here. And again, abuse of any kind is not acceptable. So that's going to be important. And again, you are a volunteer, but that is a privilege, and we don't have to allow you to stay a volunteer if we notice things like this happening. Being a positive role model. Again, some of these things all go with that. Obviously you're not going to do physical or verbal abuse and still be considered a positive role model. As I am the extension educator, and we also have 4-H council members and stuff, so they are really the supervisors, if you will, of volunteers. So if we ask you to do something, then you're really expected to do that. And then we do ask, again, this is a training. I'm glad you're here and listening to it. We do ask you to participate in trainings and continue to improve as a volunteer. There are some things here that don't involve as many volunteers, but operating machinery and vehicles, it's important to, follow the safety equipment rules. If you're driving kids, it's important to follow the vehicle use policy that's outlined in our policies and procedures. Be good role models with examples of how you treat animals. Obviously, we work with animals a lot in 4-H, and we need to make sure we set a good example and treat them in a humane manner. Technology, that is, again, the way of the world, and it's obviously going to be an important part of communicating with families and members, but it's important to make sure we're doing that in an appropriate manner, having appropriate conversations, and not taking advantage of that technology. And then again, just accepting your overall responsibility to promote 4-H and help us develop an effective program and be a good representation. So other expectations, a communication is one of those that I really want to highlight. A lot of times when we see clubs or volunteers that are struggling or not having as much success, it really often relates to their communication. If you do not communicate much with the extension office or your other volunteers in your club, then a lot of times that's where the problems arise. So communication is going to be very important. It's also going to be important to communicate with your 4-H members and their families. If they don't know when the club meetings are, it's not going to help. They're not going to show up. That's pretty much, a very critical key to having a successful 4-H program. Follow all our policies and procedures. One of those I mentioned before is minor safety training. That is something that is relatively new, and so I like to emphasize it. But you can find all of our policies and procedures, and I can send those to you if you have questions. But it's important to follow all of those. And as I mentioned before, to include those 3 main focus areas into your learning events and any other opportunities you see. As you can see on this slide, I said see handouts. If you, I have handouts for lots of this information. If you'd like to have some, just request it. Send me an email and I can make sure that you have that. We also have specific breakdowns of different volunteer roles. So obviously a 4-H council and their role is going to look different than in a club leader or a livestock committee member. So if you'd like to see a better breakdown of what your role will look like, we have those and we can send those to you. Some important things to note in policies and procedures is the financials. We have a complete breakdown of what is required for finances, and some of these things are going to be a little different than what you might be used to. So in clubs, we ask that both club leaders will sign, or you have 2 people sign a check to make sure that everyone understands what's being spent. We only use checks. We're not allowed to use credit cards. We're not allowed to really do any online fundraising whatsoever. So it's important that you remember that. We also have things to outline those documents and information more. As you can see down there, that's where you can find some of that information. We also have financial documents and reporting that is due every year, usually in the fall. So we will be sending out information if you are a club leader that you have to make sure that that stuff is turned in every year. One of the things that a lot of outsiders don't always think about is the use of our logo, and they just think, hey, I'm just going to copy this and put this on here in any which way we want. But there are actually a lot of important guidelines for the use of the 4-H logo. As you can see for this example in this picture, there is a little 18 USC 707 code at the bottom corner that has to be on a clover. We're also if it's not on there, that means it's not an official 4-H clover. We also, are not supposed to put anything over the clover, like in our designs of any kind, or slant the clover or make it look different. Really, the way it looks here is the way it should look. But for additional information on that, you can, again, go to that link and we can share more information on how to use that if you plan on copying it in your promotional materials. The 4-H experience. This is going to be really important to remember as a volunteer. The way that the 4-H experience works is a little different than maybe what we might be used to in other places, but we do utilize the experiential learning model, which starts with experience, goes to share, process, generalize, and apply. So a lot of times in classrooms and stuff, they explain, they process, then they experience and apply. But we do the experience part first. So that is a really important thing to remember when working with groups. Another important thing to remember is that 4-H is not just about the fair. The fair is definitely one of the most exciting times in our year, and one of the things that most 4-H members look the most forward to. And that's great. And I'm not saying that that is bad by any means, but I just want to make sure as a volunteer that you understand that members do not necessarily have to bring something to the fair in order to complete 4-H. We have Spark Clubs now, which is a cool experience that people can can do, and that would only maybe require 6 hours of their time per year. But it is a way to complete, and is still a way that someone can be involved in the 4-H program. 4-H is really designed to be a year-round thing, so we do expect clubs to meet more than just in the summer. We also are wanting club leaders and other volunteers to encourage you to get involved in other ways besides just the fair. There are so many other experiences that are offered through 4-H, like including state trips, which are amazing experiences and a great way to get kids to feel that sense of belonging. I have been to State Junior Leader and ISLIC multiple years, and those trips, it's great to see the bonding and kids coming back multiple years because they have friends there, and they want to be involved, and it's amazing to see the leadership that comes from that. The same can be said with camp counseling or Teens as Teachers. These are great events and things that we strongly encourage you to get involved in, especially if they'd like to receive some of our scholarships. Involvement is a very important key to getting scholarships and not just bringing projects and having success at the fair alone. Effective communication, as I mentioned before, is going to be a very important part of being a 4-H volunteer. It's going to be important to effectively communicate with all these different groups of people: extension staff, 4-H council, adult volunteers, 4-H members, parents, others. It's important to know who you need to share information with and that everyone is on the same page. Sometimes we see members of committees that don't communicate with one another, and those committees are often ineffective. So it's going to be important to make sure, even if you struggle to get along sometimes, that you are communicating with one another. And cooperation is very important. Again, that's the way we set examples for our 4-H members. So be thinking about what effective communication looks like to you. Does it necessarily have to be in person? No, but that is often the most effective way to reach people. You can also contact your members and stuff through email. There is a way to look up all the members that are in your club and to send them communication through 4-H Online. If you want help doing that, please contact the office and we can show you how to access that. There are also a lot of clubs that utilize Facebook groups or Facebook pages. That's also an effective way to communicate as long as you're doing that appropriately, and maybe not the only way to communicate, because there are also a lot of other people who maybe don't utilize online technology or Facebook, so you might be missing them that way. So just be thinking about all the ways that you can communicate effectively. And that is all I have for this presentation. I thank you, and if you have additional questions about volunteering or your volunteer role, or you would like some handouts that are tied to this presentation, feel free to contact me at 812-482-1782. Thank you very much for listening.